rely on marketing more than ever to connect with audiences. One podcast aims to make sense of it all. This is Movies and Marketing.
Next Saturday night, we're sending you back to the future.
Go ahead, make my day.
How about you, you crazy Dutch bastard? What we've got here is failure to communicate.
Take a look around. We're at the threshold of hell.
But we might as well have a good time.
I am an FBI agent!
Marty, you've got to come back with me.
Where?
Back to the future.
Wait a minute, what are you doing, Doc?
I need fuel. Go ahead, quick, get in the car.
No, Doc, I just got here, okay? Jennifer's here, we're gonna take the new truck for a spin.
Well, bring her along. This concerns her, too.
Wait a minute, Doc, what are you talking about? What happens to us in the future? What, do we become assholes or something?
No, Marty. Both you and Jennifer turn out fine. It's your kids, Marty. Something has got to be done about your kids.
Hey, Doc, we better back up. We don't have enough road to get up to 88.
Roads? Where we're going, we don't need roads.
What'll happen on this podcast, Patrick? Do you think we'll turn into assholes or something?
Maybe.
Because when you think about the future, that is usually the question I ask myself.
It's a common question that I think comes up. What are we going to be? A bunch of assholes?
Who's going to be an asshole in the future? That's what I want to know. I remember seeing that movie as a kid and being confused by that part and asking my mom, I'm like, what does he mean? Why is he asking that? You know, it still comes off as strange. It's a strange line in there.
It is. Well, it's very of the time. They would just throw in those little quips that don't make a lot of sense necessarily. You know, the very first thing I guess you would ask is,
oh my God, what happens to me in the future? Do I get killed?
Yeah, no, it's your kids. It's your kids, Marty.
Something has to be done about your kids.
What's wrong with my kids? Oh, they're still using a fax machine.
They have all this great high tech, and then you have a fax machine in your house, so it's weird.
Yeah.
Anyway, maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here. So what are we doing today, Patrick? We're talking about the future. More specifically, movies set in the future. Why are we doing that?
Well, it is the year 2020. It's the start of a new decade. So especially this year in particular, and we've talked about this on Speaking Humans podcast as well, it feels very much like the future. 2020 is a big decade starter, kind of like 2000, but not necessarily with all the hoopla of 2000 with Y2K and all that. But it does. It feels like the future, right? When you talk about the future, you say 2020.
Yeah. You know, the beginning of any decade, I guess, feels kind of futuristic. 2010, 2020, 2030, they all have that stepping into a new future kind of feel about them. I don't know if it's just because of that even number or new decade, what it is about them, but it has that futuristic vibe to it.
Yeah, we're all, as human beings, we're controlled by time, right? Time is the one thing that moves us forward. And so moving into a new decade, it's exciting. It has this level of hope attached to it, of new things to come, of possibilities.
Yeah. And we all like imagining the future or thinking about this idea of the future, which is why movies about the future are so interesting, you know? And even amongst sci-fi films, they're kind of a tough thing to do. You know, it requires a lot of imagination to create this vision of what a future world will look like. And then it's kind of hard to sell people on that vision, you know, be like, oh, okay, here's this movie that's set in this other world of the future. It's like our world, but it's different because it's 100 years from now. And then you got to get people in the theater to see that. So you got to create this idea of it. It's a hard thing to do. You know, it's easier to just be like, well, aliens come down from space and they blow everything apart and we have to beat them. That's a little easier than establishing these rules of a new world and how the technology works and all these things that are a little more layered.
Yeah.
Which you can't necessarily do within a 5-second marketing pitch that you have in like a trailer or a poster or something like that, right?
Yeah, the key is the most successful ones have some grounding in reality that people can attach themselves to or see themselves in, like, oh, I could see that reality.
Yeah, no matter how crazy it is, and some of the ones we'll talk about today are more crazier than others, you have to give it some believability, or people have to buy that this world actually exists. And, depending on how far in the future it's set, you can also give it an expiration date. If you make a movie right now and it's set in 2032, you've got, 12 years until people are going to be like, well, that didn't happen. People then are going to watch it in 2033 and be like, oh, that's interesting. A lot of this stuff did happen, or that kind of looks like our world, or it could be like, this movie's totally ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, there are those that are set in the future that are complete departures from reality. I think some of the ones we talk about today have a lot of grounding in current reality, what we could perceive as being something that's possible or plausible.
Yeah. And I think if you completely detach yourself from reality, you're kind of creating another type of movie almost, a different type of movie than we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. And I kind of like these ones because they give you just that sense or inkling of what could be possible. Because we look back at movies, and I think as a child, some movies that were set in the future, and it was very exciting, right? It's so exciting to see flying cars or whatever. It just builds this like sense of wonder within you of, can this happen, and when will this come about, right?
Yeah. And it's just one of those things. It's fun to see different people's ideas of what it could be, right? You get 20 little kids and have them draw a picture of the future, and a lot of them will draw different pictures, completely different ideas. And it's fun to see what those different ideas people can come up with are. And I think the movies we selected that we're going to talk about here today represent a few of those different ideas and different styles of expressing that. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about one future movie from each of the past 4 decades and kind of explore the future setting and how they put that together and sort of what was unique about that. And we're also going to, get into a little bit of how they marketed that, how they touched on the future and how they tried to get that idea across to viewers and pull them in with that.
So we're going to start going backwards, most recent to furthest back in the 2010s, the 2000s, the 90s, the 80s. So the first movie is the movie In Time from 2011.
How old are you?
28.
I'm 105. But the day comes when you've had enough. If you had as much time as I have, what would you do with it?
Sure as hell wouldn't waste it.
And the budget on this movie was $40 million, which is, fairly low for this type of movie, which requires some sort of budget when you're creating a future world. The box office in the US, $37 million, so just under that budget. But the international box office, $136 million. So it did pretty well when you combine the US and the international. So this was a movie that had Justin Timberlake, and it came from Andrew Niccol, who was the writer, director of another well-known future movie, Gattaca, which came out in the 90s. So this is a pretty interesting movie that doesn't really get talked about a whole lot when you talk about movies of the past decade. I thought it was pretty good. I remember liking it a lot when I first saw it around that time when it came out. I didn't actually see it in the theater. But this movie set in the year 2169. The premise of this movie is kind of key to what's going on in this future world.
It's an interesting look at the future. It's not post-apocalyptic or anything like that. It's definitely a dystopian future. But people basically are genetically engineered to stop aging at 25. And at that point, a clock on their wrist begins counting down. So they have 1 year to live after 25. Unless they accumulate more time. And time is the currency of the future. So as you work, as you earn, right, you're earning time as opposed to money. So you can continue to live at that age, between 25 and 26 years old, but you could live that way for, if you were rich, hundreds of years, but using time as their currency. It's a unique take, very cool premise, in my opinion. What did you think?
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea that they explore well. And it's not only like, the time factor, it's also you stop aging, so you stay young forever. You can theoretically live forever if you acquire enough time, so if you're rich enough, you can live forever.
Yeah.
As long as you want, if you don't run out of time.
Yeah.
It's all about inequality between the people who have no time, the workers making very little, doing all the work, and then these people who are just piling on the time, whose wrists are just have all these numbers on them.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes into that rather than, a lot of these other movies that are special effects, showing us these giant cities. The future here is a lot more minimalist. The world doesn't look all that much different than it looks now, even though it's 150 years from now.
Yeah.
A lot of the fashion has a throwback vibe, the 1930s or 40s, and that's the styles of a lot of the interiors you see in some of like these rich houses and stuff like that. You wouldn't even know in a lot of the scenes that it is the future until you see certain elements of it, like digital numbers on people's wrists or some of the vehicles or things like that.
Other than people being genetically engineered to stop aging and then using the time as a currency, it doesn't look all that different from what you'd expect to be a possible, even near future, right? It's almost like an alternate reality, very hyper-focused on the characters, and the set pieces are really non-futuristic mostly. One of the things we often talk about, obviously, in movies and marketing is the marketing aspect. Not only the marketing of the movie, but then, these elements of marketing within a movie. And when you see some marketing elements within a futuristic movie, what does it look like? Set pieces and things like that. There's a scene, Justin Timberlake's running through a lower class neighborhood area, and there's a banner on the side of a building that says 99 seconds only stores. And then an advertisement for 6-pack of beer is only 1 hour. Again, setting up this idea of time is money. There's even a scene where they're buying a cup of coffee, which costs 4 minutes of your life. Very interesting look at these ideas of consumerism within futuristic movies.
Yeah, and just really nice creative touches in there. Is that a good deal for a cup of coffee? Maybe for a Starbucks, but just a plain old cup of coffee, I'd be like a minute maybe.
Yeah, I feel like it should be less than that, right? I mean, a cup of coffee for a minute? I don't know. I mean, I guess how long are you enjoying that cup of coffee maybe?
Yeah, probably like 10 or 20 minutes.
Yeah, but like, the actual sipping of it, the time in between. Man, I could make a cup of coffee last an hour. That would suck to have to spend an hour on a cup of coffee.
It all depends on demand.
Mm-hmm.
But they really established the future and established the world with these rules through signs and just these little elements. And that's a key thing you see throughout the movies we'll talk about over the decades. Fashion and cars. You just look at those two production elements, key pieces of establishing a future world.
Yeah. For all the movies I can remember in my lifetime, every time you see cars really dictated what's possible in the movie. And then all the other things sort of fall into place.
Yeah, this movie does get that element pretty right. Stylistically, they've changed, but you know what I mean? They're still 4 wheels, and basic design hasn't changed all that much, which is what you can say about cars in the last 50 years.
Yeah, but not a lot of future-looking things in the marketing of the movie. They always kind of touch on this arm time thingy, is the way I describe it, where it's the countdown timer on all of their arms, which is like this green...
Like a digital alarm clock inside your arm.
Yeah. And I think really played off of Justin Timberlake. He was the main star of the movie, so they used that.
And they also played up, I think, the premise smartly because it's fairly simple, time is money.
Mm-hmm. There was a set of posters that I really liked. They had him with the actress who plays his counterpart in the movie, a really close-up of his face and her face. Time is power, time is money. I liked that series of posters, playing off the age-old tropes, time being the all-important end game for everyone, right?
Yeah, your premise and your star, there it is. That's your selling point. Like our next pick from a decade earlier, the 2000s. This was a bigger movie with a bigger star, a bigger director, and a bigger budget. We're talking about the 2002 movie Minority Report.
The future can be seen.
All we have to run on are the images that they produce.
We see what they see.
There hasn't been a murder in 6 years. There's nothing wrong with the system. It is
Perfect, I agree.
Murder can be stopped.
Tell me exactly what it is you're looking for.
Flaws. You ever get any false positives?
We are arresting individuals who have broken no law.
But they will.
The fact that you prevented it from happening doesn't change the fact that it was going to happen.
The system can't be wrong.
Run! away!
You say something, Chief?
No. You're in a lot of trouble, John. I have a warrant in my pocket that says murder.
Don't run.
The budget on that one was $102 million. U.S. box office, $132 million. Surprised that wasn't a little higher. And the international box office on that was $226 million. So just all around, a bigger movie. And you see it watching the movie. This was, of course, directed by Steven Spielberg and starring, of course, Mr. Tom Cruise.
Mm-hmm.
So this movie, many of you may be familiar with, probably more so than In Time. And this one's set in 2054, Washington, D.C. It's about a unit of police that can predict crimes before they happen and arrest people before they even commit the crimes, which is, all well and good until one of their lead detectives is arrested for a crime before he even commits it, and that kind of sets off the whole plot of the movie. Minority Report, Patrick, what do you think about this movie?
This movie is just so incredibly deep with future stuff because it's Steven Spielberg.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to name all of them. I mean, really, there's one scene that in the public space where there's cameras everywhere in this future, and the advertising recognizes him with like a facial/retina scan and basically advertises to him directly, uses his name, knows things about him and his previous purchases and things like that, trying to appeal to him and get him to buy those products, which is not far off, especially with the tech being developed, facial recognition software, all that stuff. So in the future, I could see it happening more in public spaces.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it's because of this movie or just a result of this movie happened because people were predicting that, they researched it.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people are like, oh yeah, that's what the future of advertising is going to look like. You're going to walk through a bus depot or something like that, and you're going to get this personalized advertising that only you can see, where they're like, hey John, have you checked out this new shirt? Hey, you haven't been back to buy any of these in a while. You should come back and check these out at the Gap.
The road you're on, John Anderton, is the one less traveled. Make sure you are on time.
Good evening. You can move the old-fashioned
John Anderton.
Century 21 style provides gourmet cuisine. John Anderton. You can use a Guinness right about now.
Stressed out, John Anderton?
Escape from it all, Harrison. Get away, John Anderton. Forget your troubles.
John Anderton.
Hello, Mr. Yakamoto. Welcome back to the Gap. How those assorted tank tops work out for you?
Mr. Yakamoto.
I really like those couple of scenes just because from a marketing advertising perspective, personalizing things to that extent, that scene where he's walked through there and Guinness draft tells him a refreshing Guinness is something you want. And then you mentioned the Gap scene where he walks into the store and he's had retinal transplants. So the retinas of that other person who he got their eyes, when he walks into the store, the holographic program recognizes that person and welcomes him back and asks him how the assorted tank tops worked out for him. So, very customized and personalized customer service even from a retail establishment.
Yeah. In some ways, this movie is so far out there. It's got flying vehicles, eye-scanning, crawling robots, these precogs that can predict the future. So it feels very sci-fi. But for all that, there's so much of it that just feels really grounded. Oh yeah, I could totally see that being the future. And that's, one part of it where you're like, oh man, that seems like maybe we're 5 years away from it.
It's not everything, but it's just those elements, right?
Yeah, the way they incorporate those different things in there. And that's what helps sell the whole thing as a package. You know what I mean? You just buy this world in so many ways. And it's such a rich world, you know what I mean? The details that are just included. I mean, it's one of the movies that incorporates marketing into the future. We'll probably talk about a couple others down this list, but I think a Blade Runner as another one where there were all the billboards and stuff in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really lit up. It's another movie where they just know that marketing is such a big part of our lives that obviously in the future, it's just going to be incorporated even more. So I think this movie does a really good job of including that element in the future they envision.
Yeah. Consumerism, advertising has been big in our lives at this point. Imagine it bigger and bolder and brighter and more in your face.
Obviously, it's also a product placement opportunity.
Oh, for sure. But, jetpacks, self-driving cars, virtual augmented reality computers with a lot of the swiping of information with hands going on in this movie.
That idea of computing as being the future, because it's become kind of almost like satirized and other movies have copied it. I think so many people think like, oh, that's what it's going to become to use a computer in the future. That's just become ingrained in people's heads because of this movie.
Yeah, technology plays such a huge part. Like we talk about the automobiles, computers are a big part of that, or the tech.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think the two go hand in hand. We've seen how technology has evolved, and that's when we think about the future, that's one of the first things we think of.
I also thought about Tom Cruise has to solve this mystery, but he always gets a chance to run in his movies because nobody can run like Tom Cruise. And they show that in the marketing, right? Which I think is part of the appeal of Tom Cruise. The marketing is always he's running, he's being chased.
Yeah, no doubt. And you see that everybody runs. They put the tagline on there and they're like, there's going to be running. It's Tom running. Don't worry about the movie. You want to see Tom Cruise running, right?
Yeah.
They just focus on Tom Cruise, which at that time in particular, but almost any time throughout his career, is all you really needed to do to sell a movie.
Yeah, he is the number one draw. And if you want to see a movie about the future, oh, by the way, you could come see that too.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And that also holds true in the 1990s decade when we talk about Demolition Man from 1993. Technology is pretty important in that movie.
At the end of a century, ravaged by violence, a society of perfect order will arise. Criminals will be frozen and reprogrammed in cryogenic prisons.
The prisoners are ice cubes. Their criminal instincts are being reprogrammed as they sleep.
Aggression and deviant behavior will be totally eliminated. But in the year 2032...
This morning, Simon Phoenix escaped from this cryo facility. We are, quite frankly, not equipped to deal with the situation.
Amidst a world of peace and calm...
We're police officers. We're not trained for this kind of violence.
How was the fiendish Simon Phoenix apprehended back in the 20th?
In the end, it took just one man. John Spartan.
You mean the Demolition Man?
That one had a budget of $57 million, and the U.S. box office did $58 million, so made $1 million, and international $101 million. So it did pretty well. I mean, international always tends to do a little bit better in a lot of these movies, especially movies with these big American Hollywood stars.
It is interesting to note the disparity between the U.S. box office and the international, at least in our picks for these future movies, do much better worldwide than they do U.S. box office, even something going back to Demolition Man.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about Demolition Man. We'll give our listeners the premise for the movie, even though, this is a movie from 93. So if you haven't seen it already, you should. It is a good flick.
Yeah, it's a later Stallone classic, I would say. Remember, this was made in 1993. So it starts off in an apocalyptic 1996. And then our story moves ahead to a much nicer 2032, where crime has been almost eliminated, or at least hidden away. So the plot of this one is Stallone and Snipes are battling a good guy cop and a psychopath in 96. Stallone stops Snipes, but he gets punished for some reason I forget about. And so they both get frozen because they have that technology. And then Snipes ends up escaping from his cryogenic freezing in 2032, so then they have to bring Stallone out of freezing too to catch him. So then they're both loose in this future world that is much different, much nicer, much kinder than the one they remember in 96. So this is a very, very different look at the future. This is, I would call it a cartoony, kind of grade school kids version of the future. Everything looks like it's on a set. It's not like Minority Report where you feel like you're grounded in reality. It all looks like, oh, there's a set of somebody's made up the future. Complete with Taco Bell now dominates the world because they won the franchise wars. So there's a super Taco Bell they show in the movie.
Which is believable.
Is it Taco Bell would win? I mean, most people would say McDonald's would win, but maybe Taco Bell was somehow the underdog.
it was popular. I guess it's believable that this franchise came out as the underdog, maybe, like you said, and won. Destroyed everybody else.
Yeah. I mean, at the time it came out, Taco Bell was, if not my favorite fast food restaurants, one of them.
Yeah, when you could get 20 tacos for $1.
Mm-hmm. I was a teenager shoving tacos down my throat. It's like, yeah, Taco Bell won the franchise war. I knew they would win. Yeah, but side note, in 2018, Taco Bell actually built the Demolition Man Taco Bell they show in the movie, which is like a very souped up, crazy looking Taco Bell. They built it for Comic-Con, showing the ongoing popularity of this movie. A very different vision of the future than we've seen in the previous couple movies we've talked about. What do you think of this one, Patrick?
I mean, in my opinion, it's just plain fun. I always say this, going into a Stallone or Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, you go in with the expectations of, you're not getting Shakespeare. Or as I like to say, it's not rocket surgery. It's just silly fun, like the seashells in the bathroom where they actually use seashells to clean themselves, I guess, in the bathroom. Things like that.
Yeah, it's future tech played as a joke with no real explanation to it, right?
Yeah. So you just assume, because there's no toilet paper, that the seashell does something, but you don't know what. So, but like you said earlier, there's some ideas that are just pure product placements too, like the idea that Taco Bell won the franchise war. Interesting fact, though, I don't know if you knew this, Shad, but PepsiCo, Taco Bell's and Pizza Hut's parent company, decided that some movie scenes would be filmed twice because Taco Bell isn't widely known outside the U.S., so they replaced versions of the movie outside the US with Pizza Hut. So there's actually two versions of this movie with scenes where they've replaced the logos and stuff post-production with Pizza Hut logos. So we say Taco Bell, but our listeners outside of the US right now might go, what are they talking about, Taco Bell? Because they've only seen the Pizza Hut version.
That's crazy. It would be weird to see with Pizza Hut. That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
I mean, they also have, it's all over the place with the technology, There's they have the machines that are everywhere that find people for swearing, that print out a ticket.
Yeah.
Don't know how that's possible or how that works. The VR headsets that have replaced sex.
Yeah.
It's all just goofy. None of it's very consistent, though.
Yeah. And what's kind of funny about this movie? This movie doesn't feel like an R-rated movie to me, but it's R-rated.
Yeah. No, it feels like a kid's movie in some way. Like the marketing for it, like the cover of it, even the look of it.
Yeah. It's set in this future that is very kind, very G-rated. There's no crime. There's no swearing. There's none of this stuff. And they throw in these elements now of the past, Stallone and Wesley Snipes.
They're the R-rated element.
Yeah, they're the R-rated, they're the fish out of water sort of element in this movie where they throw them into this world and it creates chaos. So I get that part, but it doesn't totally feel like an R-rated movie. So I think it was maybe a little crazy to market this movie.
Yeah, would have done better as like a PG-13 movie. I will mention one nice touch that I really liked in here was instead of songs on the radio, they're all listening to commercial jingles.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the hit songs on the radio.
Yes, yes.
I thought that's kind of a funny and interesting element. That was a nice touch.
Yeah, there's that scene where Sandra Bullock and Sylvester Stallone and there's another police officer or whatever in the car and they're singing the jingles and he's like, what are we listening to? And they're just commercial jingles.
Yeah, that's pretty great.
Yeah, and a great glimpse of the marketing future that could be. You never know.
Yeah, you can see it. The way those get stuck in your head, it's not entirely impossible.
Perhaps you'd like to hear an oldies station. Oldies?
Oh, what a relief!
Oh, this is the most popular station in town. Wall-to-wall mini-tunes. You call them commercials.
Here's that classic you've all been waiting for. The #1 request of the day. Armor hot dogs.
Yes! Kids eat Armor hot dogs. Oh, wow. This is my fave.
Skinny kids, kids who climb on rocks. Top kids, sissy kids.
Even kids with chicken pox love hot dogs. Armor hot dogs. The dogs kids love to buy.
So that leads us into the 1980s. Very nostalgic look back at our childhood, Shad. Back to the Future Part 2.
Do you remember the future?
You've got to come back with me.
Where?
Back
future?
October 21st, 2015.
Marty, we're going to be able to see our wedding.
Wow. The future. I gotta check this out, Doc.
We had to do it.
Yeah, we had to. I mean, it was a given. It was easy. 1989, Back to the Future Part 2 came out, had a budget of $40 million. U.S. box office did $119 million, international $216 million. Beloved by many, the Back to the Future franchise series as a whole. What do you think about this choice?
This is an interesting one. You know, this is a really interesting movie, especially as showing the future, because it's now the past. It was set in 2015, came out in 1989. The first one comes out in 1985, so this one is still set in 1985 partially, but then they're traveling ahead. At the time was 30 years to 2015, so they were imagining the future that to us now has already become the past. And it is really cool, the future in here, because it's just loaded with products. We talked about how In Time just didn't really have the products, the tech, the gadgets. This is what Back to the Future 2 is all about, which makes sense considering when it came out, which was the end of the 80s, the decade that was obsessed with products, consumerism, gadgets. We love these things. You know, this is what that time was all about. It was like, I want more stuff, show me more cool stuff. And we see that here. We're just loaded with it. We see future versions of Pepsi, Nike shoes, hoverboards, weird hats, glasses, jackets, Jaws 4D, the kitchen of the future, flat screen TVs. There's just left and right everywhere you go in this future world. There's just these tech and these products that are, for me, what I remember most about this movie. And, you know, when you're looking at the future, they kind of fit with our relationship with tech today, and some of them kind of dead on with where we are.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of my ultimate favorites as a kid. So this future was so exciting. I couldn't get enough of it. You know what I mean? Like watching this movie, this was the movie I was so excited for. After Back to the Future came out and it said to be continued, it was like I waited. It felt like decades for this movie to come out.
I agree with that. I agree. It did feel like forever until it came out. Now, let me ask you, do you like this movie? Did you like it at the time?
I loved this look at the future. I mean, I really did.
I just remember, I love Back to the Future, one of my favorite movies of all time still. I just remember feeling, and I don't even know if I knew how to process it at the time, a little let down by the second one. And I think I know the reason now is I watch it and I don't want them to leave the future.
Yeah.
You know, when it goes into that whole other part where then we go into the alternate 1985 and then we redo the first movie, and they kind of corrected it in the third one where they're like, all right, we're going to time travel to the Old West and we're just going to make it about the Old West.
Yeah.
I wish the second one was that. I wish they time traveled to the future and they just made it about the future, because I feel like that's the funnest part of the movie.
I think that's a good point. I do wish it would have spent more time in the future and exploring that a little bit more. But again, there was a lot in that movie.
There was a lot. And probably to keep it up for the whole movie would have been intense, but I wanted it.
Yeah. But a lot of product placements, Spielberg, I think, got that right or wrong, however you want to look at it. But it's also a look at some great ideas that were really close predictions, except for people still using faxes to send documents.
At the time, that was like business technology, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
No one had it in their home.
That was a big deal. I think I loved the idea of the jacket that dried out after he was in the water and it shrunk to fit his size when he first put it on. I loved those little touches.
Yeah, the shoes that adjusted to fit you.
Yeah. Which we've talked about, I think, on past episodes of Speaking Human, right? Where they released those for real. Nike did.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things in this movie where, you know, it's like what came first, the movie or the technology? These type of movies inspire people to bring this future to life.
And it's kind of funny because when you ask people, a lot of times people will say just in passing, where's my hoverboard? If it doesn't exist yet, when a movie dates itself, and then people are like, where are these things I was promised? I don't see them. I'm a little disappointed.
You lied to me.
You lied to me. So it's interesting how movies do influence the way we perceive what we think the future should be like. So yeah, and the marketing of this movie rode the coattails, so to speak, of the first movie because it was very successful. So Michael J. Fox, very similar poster artwork from the first movie.
Yeah, and tough not to do that. You know, the first one was such a big hit. It's tough not to just copy that same thing, and I think that's one of the great poster art of our time, with the flames going through his legs, the DeLorean door open, him looking at his watch. They added in Doc Brown for the second one because they're like, wow, we need the Doc.
Yeah, he's a big part of that. He created the time machine, man.
I know. He created the flux capacitor, which is what makes time travel possible.
You created a time machine out of a DeLorean?
I'll tell my related marketing story that I remember from when I was a kid and this movie came out, and they had a marketing tie-in with Pizza Hut of Demolition Man, where you could get a pair of futuristic solar shades for a couple dollars whenever you ordered a pizza. And so I would like bother my mom all the time. We gotta order a pizza. I gotta collect them all. They had 4 different pairs. I don't think I ever got them all, but they used to play it on TV all the time. And I'm like, I gotta get these futuristic shades. I gotta get them. I need to have them.
These days, everyone's going back to the future, where people are looking at the world through very different glasses. Now bring part of Back to the Future back with you. Drop by any Pizza Hut restaurant and get a pair of futuristic solar shades inspired by the movie Back to the Future Part 2. Only $1.99 with any Pizza Hut pizza. Collect a different pair each week while supplies last. Solar shades from Pizza Hut. They're going like there's no tomorrow.
Pizza Hut, making it great.
Do you remember this promotion?
I remember that. I forgot about it, and I would never remember that had you not brought it up. But, oh, man, I totally remember those.
Yeah, it sticks out in my mind. Don't ask me why I still remember that. My mom probably even remembers it because I was just like nonstop. I'm like, I need to have these. And they're like, you know, the weirdest looking things.
Yeah, and, you know, they were junk, just like anything they gave with any kind of meal or deal there in those franchises.
Yeah. But a great promotion. They totally look like they're from the future. By the future, I mean 1989.
Yeah. So that's a good look, I think, at the last, 40-odd years. Do you want to cover a couple of your favorites that we didn't talk about on the episode?
Yeah, we brainstormed at least 25 different movies throughout those 4 decades that we were even thinking about which ones to talk about. So a couple of mine both come from the past 20 years. My first one is Children of Men. Children of Men is a movie I really love. Set in 2027, so not too far into the future. And this is a movie where people have just lost the ability to reproduce, so people stop having babies. Definitely dystopian, very much grounded in reality. You're not seeing technology here and there. Things look a little different, but mostly this doesn't look too different from our world right now. Much more tumult, you know, a lot more things on fire, rioting, stuff like that. Just an incredible movie, real well made. There's some just crazy shots in there. A movie, if you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out.
The story is great in that movie.
Yeah, the story's really good, and it's one you really get sucked into and just visually grabs you. You just really get pulled into this world, and it's probably one of my favorite movies of the past 20 years of the 2000s. And then the other one I picked out, which I'll kind of tie in too. The other one I picked out was Her, which was a great movie from Spike Jonze about a guy who falls in love with the operating system on his phone, voiced by Scarlett Johansson. It's a really interesting look at the future. One, because of how people dress, which is Joaquin Phoenix wears all these pants that he hikes up really high like Clint Eastwood.
Yeah.
And two, just this idea the world evolves enough where people are falling in love with their technology. The tie with that I also was thinking about was Blade Runner 2049, where you see Ryan Gosling in this movie has like this virtual girlfriend or companion, you know, which is kind of something similar where it's like a holographic lady friend he brings up that almost, you know, seems real to him, has a personality, everything like that, is really like a great character within that movie, but just creates this, you know, maybe in 30 years, that's where we'll be. It doesn't seem that far off, and the way the movie plays it out, it just plays really well. And I think those two ideas are pretty similar to each other in the way they're positioned. They seem ridiculous when you say them out loud, but when you watch those movies, they both sell them pretty well.
Yeah, they're pretty immersive movies. One thing I will say about both of those, not only do these two men fall in love or are in love with their operating system or virtual girlfriend or whatever, but it's more AI, right? It seems alive. Same with the virtual girlfriend.
Yeah.
Like, it's not the computers we think of today.
And it seems to have feelings back, right?
Yeah, emotions and feelings back. Yeah, where it's evolved to the point of this is an entity, not just a computer or a piece of technology, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's really interesting in that way.
Yeah. So I picked two of probably my most favorite sci-fi movies of all time. One is Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey, released in 2014. And it's thought to be set in the 2070s.
Okay.
Dystopian future where Earth's resources and crops are dying. And astronauts then travel through a wormhole in our solar system to find a new home for humanity, mostly set in space and on a farm. The tech resides when he's in space, and the farm equipment on the farm is all computerized. So pretty interesting there, but again, just a really cool look at the future, and you got this sci-fi element obviously to it when they're in space, and there's black holes. There's all kinds of stuff happening in this movie, but very cool.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in that movie. That is an interesting part, though, when you think about the farming and technology, two things you normally don't associate together.
Mm-hmm.
And that movie does a good job grounding this farm, something that's unchanging, you think, for like centuries. And here it is, incorporating that technology into it, adding the future, shining a light on this area where you wouldn't necessarily think about the future. When you think about the future, you normally think of cities. So that's an interesting one to think about in that light.
Yeah. And then the other movie, this movie was released in 97, Gattaca. And the best way I always describe it is it's kind of like a Brave New World, dystopian future. There's no real date that I know of that this is set in. It's just set in the future. People are genetically profiled, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. There's something wrong with them. They're blackballed.
Yeah. This movie, interestingly, though, I just wanted to touch on a couple things, bombed at the box office. It only made $12 million, and it had a $36 million budget. Did horribly. Gained a cult following on quote-unquote home video. But an interesting fact about the marketing of this movie, the movie was promoted with a fake ad in the Washington Post for a company offering to genetically alter embryos, and the tagline, "Children made to order." The ad had a list of genetic traits that could be supposedly added to the child, and it had a phone number in this ad. Thousands of people, I guess, called the number wanting to have their unborn children altered. Is that not the craziest thing you've ever heard?
That is crazy.
I believe it. It's not so crazy that I don't believe it. It's just like, what? What an interesting way to sort of like guerrilla style marketing a movie. Obviously, it didn't work too well because it only made $12 million in the box office. But yeah, just a great movie overall.
That is a very good movie. It's unfortunate that it bombed. Not totally surprising. I feel like the name, kind of a tough sell.
Yeah, the original name was called The Eighth Day. And there was a movie that came out before this got released, so they had to change the name.
Was there an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie with a name like that?
No, I think that was The Sixth Day.
Oh, okay. There's a movie with every day number, I think.
Yeah. I actually kind of like the name, but...
It's not bad. It's just for like selling a movie you've never heard of.
Yeah.
Interstellar, you're like, ooh, space adventure. Gattaca, I'm like, I don't know what that is.
But yeah. So I think that's a really good look at just a wide variety, too, of stories and predictions for the future, in some of these movies. And we'll have the complete list, and maybe we'll have like a little poll, and you could vote for which one is your favorite, or which ones are your favorite out of that list.
Yeah.
We'd love to get your opinions.
You could jump in. All you WALL-E fans could jump in.
Yeah, WALL-E's got some great elements in it.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Great look at the future through the eyes of the past.
Nugget of human wisdom. Well, that's it for this episode of Movies and Marketing. Until next time, let's fade to black.
I'll be back.
He's not coming back.